I'm here today with Val Thogmartin. It's August 19th, 2006, about 10:30 in the morning. Would you state your name, please?
Val Thogmartin.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
Caucasian.
And did you grow up in Columbus?
I actually grew up in a small town about an hour north of here called Richwood, Ohio. Population, very few, about 1,500 people.
All right. Did you spend all of your youth in Richwood?
I was there until I graduated high school, and then I moved to Columbus to go to Ohio State, and then I've been here since.
All right. And do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have one brother who's 2 years older than I am. He's him and his wife live in right outside of Mansfield. I have two sisters, one who lives in Powell, Ohio, and also has a place down in South Carolina, and then a sister who lives in Chicago who has spina bifida. She is, an interesting fact, she's the head of the Lutheran Church's outreach program for disabled youth, and she works nationally with that, so, but she lives in a suburb of Chicago.
All right. What is your earliest memory?
Memory period?
Yes. First thing you remember about being alive?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably staying with my grandparents when my parents would go on vacation. Both my brother and I was probably 3-4 years old. My grandparents had a farm down the road, and we would stay with them and help my grandfather. The reason I remember is because we'd help him feed the animals and all that stuff. So that's probably the earliest memory I have, yeah.
All right. And where did you go to elementary school at?
It's called Claiborne Elementary. It's in Richwood, Ohio.
And you went to high school in Richwood too?
Yeah, it's called North Union High School.
All right. When you were a kid, when you were growing up, who were your heroes?
I suppose like any kid, Superman. Gosh, who else? That's really a hard question because I don't remember having one particular hero that stuck out above everybody else. My mom, she was a hero figure. Other than that, you know, anybody in particular that I...
All right. How old were you when you first realized that you were different than the other kids?
Oh, probably in about the 7th, 8th grade. I knew that I was attracted to boys and to men much more than I ever fantasized about girls. Found one particular teacher I had to be really, and actually if you want to talk about heroes, he was our English teacher, and he's probably one of, not a childhood hero, but when I was in like the 8th and 9th grade, he was probably one of the people that I saw as a hero, because he just, he wasn't like a super handsome guy, but I just loved his personality and the fact that he brought out the thinking part of me, and was there as a mentor pretty much. So, and I found him I didn't know at the time what it meant or anything, but in an odd way to be attracted, myself to be attracted to him.
So if I just make sure I understand, the thing that made you realize that you were different was feeling romantic attractions to other boys?
No, I don't know if you could even say romantic attractions, just that I wanted to be around boys more than I did around girls. I found more of a kinship with boys and men than I did with girls.
When you first had these feelings and started realizing this, did you tell anyone?
No. No, in a small town the size of Richwood, you didn't. And back in, I mean, this was in the early 1960s, so you really didn't discuss that at all.
All right. When you were growing up, when you were a kid, early teen years, did you ever hear people talk about gay people?
When I was a very young teenager, the only thing you heard say about gay people was that there were evil men who hung out in public restrooms and liked to play with boys. The first ever sort of positive thing I remember hearing about gay people was, I remember watching the news when I was, I think, like a freshman or sophomore in high school, and it was the local news, and there was actually a gay wedding going on down at Ohio State, put on by the gay alliance, and it made the news. Of course, they didn't really portray it in a really positive way, but it kind of jumped out at me. So that's probably the first semi-positive thing that I remember hearing about.
And this would have been in
probably like 68, 69, somewhere, about 69 I would say, maybe 70, 69 or 70, something like that.
when you were growing up, either at the time or as you look back on it now, did you know other people who were gay?
I knew people who it was rumored to be gay. Our family doctor lived with another man in Magnetic Springs, which is a neighboring town, for a long time, and I'm pretty sure my parents knew that their relationship was more than just platonic, because they were very good friends with both of them. And Kurt, who, he wasn't the doctor, he was the other person in the relationship, and he had some very effeminate qualities about him, and some of the remarks he would make would definitely lead you to, particularly if you knew anything at all, would definitely lead you to rationalize the fact that he was gay.
How were they looked upon in the community?
I don't think anybody talked about it, but I don't think they were looked upon negatively at all either. It was just pretty much people just didn't say anything about it. They lived together for years. They got along with everybody. They had Dr. Moore, who was our family doctor, had a very good practice. People trusted him, went to him. Like I said, they circulated with, in parties with all the neighbors and everything, but people just really didn't talk about it. It's a very small country town, so it just wasn't really mentioned at all.
When you were in high school, tell me about any development in your gay identity that might have taken place.
I was really attracted to my best friend, who, Keith McKnight, one of the original signers of the Articles of Incorporation, and really we did some kind of messing around as teenagers, but never really thought a whole lot about it, and then it just sort of drifted apart after that, but that was probably, and then just I found myself, particularly in my junior and senior years, when you started to hear more about gay organizations, and because this was my junior and senior year were like 1971, 72, so this was like after Stonewall, so you started to hear more things about it in the news, particularly in the national news, and I found myself to be listening more intently at these stories than I found it to be. And I remember some TV shows that were on too. There was one with Hal Holbrook, I think, was in it, called A Certain Summer, and that was in probably 1970 or 71 maybe, where he played a gay father who came out to his family, and it was sort of cast in a semi-positive light that really focused on the problems that everybody went through. And I remember sitting and intently watching that too. So, I think at that point I just started kind of realizing, that definitely there was something different about me.
So, how did you decide to come to Ohio State?
Basically just chose to go to Ohio State because I thought it was a good school, and at the time it was a relatively reasonable school to go to. And it was a big school, and I wanted to get out of small town Ohio and get away from that and move to the city, so this was an opportunity to do it.
When you decided to go to Ohio State, what was the major that you were going to pursue?
Organizational psychology.
Did you graduate from Ohio State?
Yes.
And was that the major?
I graduated in business,
okay,
with a minor in that, yes.
So tell me about when you came to Ohio State, when you came to Columbus to go to Ohio State, had you spent much time in Columbus before?
A little bit. Came down as a kid sometimes. Mom would bring us down shopping and stuff at Christmas, and in high school, some of my friends and I would come down to Columbus and spend some time here, but I wasn't real familiar with it when I moved here, no.
So tell me about your first impressions of coming down here to go to school.
I like the size of it. I like the anonymity. The fact that I was in a completely different world than what I'd grown up in. It was, I loved the academics of it, the fact that I could kind of start to be myself and not have to worry about an image that I was projecting upon any small community or anything.
Prior to coming to Ohio State, had you ever told anyone, I'm gay or
No.
I like men?
No.
Once
Actually, I'm not even sure that I was convinced myself prior to coming to Ohio State.
All right. Tell me about how you explored your gay identity after you came to Ohio State.
It was probably my, I think, sophomore or very early junior year, because I dated a girl for a couple of years in college, and then after that, there was one day I was walking through the Ohio Union and saw a sign for gay, at the time it was Gay Activist Alliance, and just happened to build up the courage to walk into the office. And basically after that, I kind of, asked some questions, that sort of thing. They had some brochures. Didn't really go to any meetings at that, but I did pick up on the fact that through that and through a job that I had, that there were a couple of bars downtown that I had heard of that gay people went to. And one of them was Cat's Meow, and the other was Kismet. And that ages me. Cat's Meow was the first bar I ever went into. And
where was that located?
it was at, where the Flatiron building is now? That's where it was. I forget what it's called now, but anyway, that was the first one. I sat in the parking lot for probably 25 minutes working up the nerve to go inside. And finally just built up the courage, went in, sat down at the bar. And the funniest thing was there was a gentleman sitting beside me, an older gentleman sitting beside me, started asking me questions about bars in town. This is like my first night in a gay bar. And I finally had to look at him and go, look, you're probably asking the wrong person here. I said, this is the first time I've ever been in a gay bar, so I really can't tell you that much about it. And we worked up a nice conversation, just talked that night. Actually, it turned out to be a very pleasant night. The bartender was very nice. I have no idea who it was, if I ever saw him again. And then after that, the second time I went out, I went to the Kismet and actually met some people that became friends with, and kind of associated with for a while. So actually ran into an old high school friend of mine. His name is Stephen. Ran into him there. I had not seen him since he actually moved away to Marysville, which is a community down the road from Richwood. And I had seen him since probably the junior year, and I just happened to be at the bar, and he walked up and actually remembered me, and then we started talking, and so we just hung around together for a long time after that. So, and pretty much the Kismet became my bar of choice for a long time to go to.
At that time, where was the Kismet located at?
It was where Eagles is now. I was never at the one on, I think there was one on High Street, and that they had changed locations before I came out.
So tell me about what the Cat's Meow was like on the inside. What was
it was a smaller bar, just kind of a little bit of a dive. It was like back then, all the bars were dark. There were no windows. The doors didn't open. You didn't have doors that, with like glass window doors or anything like that. It was pretty much, kind of a tight little community. The people in there were friendly. It was a little bit beyond the point where they still had the cops raiding the place. You didn't really see that very much at all then. Although there was still the rule about anybody who was in drag had to have on at least two or three pieces of men's clothing, and that's the truth. And the drag queens would have to get, like if they were going to perform, would have to get ready there and change there, and there was those rules that still existed. That's probably where I met some of the first drag queens I ever met too. And, like I said, it's just a smaller bar. It had a treacherous steps to go down to the restrooms were in the basement, and these stairs were probably about half the width of my feet. And if you got drunk at all, those stairs were pure hell to try to manipulate. So it was famous for that. But it was, it's just like I said, a small bar.
Did women go there as well?
No, you didn't. There may have been a few, but you didn't see very many. Pretty much back then, women had their bar, men had their bars. The women's bar was Jack's, or Summit Station as it was called. I think it's still called Summit Station. And pretty much they hung out there. There was a few bars where you would see a few lesbians, particularly the ones that had drag shows. You would see a few lesbians and there was like a bar on Cleveland Avenue called the Twilight that was owned by two lesbians, and they had a lot of shows, and you would see kind of a mix there. But pretty much the bars back then were pretty strictly a men's bar and pretty strictly a women's bar.
Did people with different racial backgrounds all attend the same bars, or was there a separation that way too?
They did, but there was, like, sometimes some of the bars would charge cover to black people to get in. One of my best friends over the years that I bartended with, Bob Wilder, who's a bartender at the Tremont, experienced discrimination. And this was both at the Kismet did it sometimes. There were other bars that would still discriminate against people of color. It happened, unfortunately.
You mentioned a moment ago some sort of a rule or regulation that required drag queens wear several items of men's clothing. How was it that you became aware of that?
Because I became friends with some drag queens, and so they kind of told me about what was going on and stuff.
Do you know anyone that was arrested for not?
Can't think of anybody offhand who was. I know several who were hassled by the police. Like Brandy Lamont can tell you stories about that, and people, Stephanie Powers, people like that who were way back in the beginning, all went through some police harassment at the time. Yeah, it was common. That was back in the days when it was a little bit beyond that, but it was still back in the days when they would hold Berwick, and they had to call people like the day of Berwick to let them know, okay, this is where the party's going to be, because the cops would still hassle people if they were dressed in full drag or whatever. So it was still some pretty stringent laws. This is the middle 70s, so the laws had not become that much better yet.
Tell me about what the Kismet, what the layout of that place was like, and the mood or the attitude there.
The Kismet, when you first walked in, had a little square bar where I think the Eagles had the same kind of bar right there. It had a lighted dance floor, which was big back then, with a K in the middle. And the back part was not even built on then. It was like pretty much, it went back to where, I don't know how much you know about Eagles, but where the Eagles had that back room, it stopped there. And it was, it was laid out like with the bar up front, and then there was like the stools along the side, the lighted dance floor, and then some tables, little tables about that high, little restaurant style tables over at the side, and there was like a couple bartenders behind the bar. And every once in a while they'd have a drag show or something like that, and basically it was dancing, and then just pretty much cruising around the bar and stuff. So,
what was the crowd like there?
It was a mix of people, people of all ages, because it was one of the few bars in town. Back then there was only maybe 3-4 bars at the most in Columbus, so it was definitely a mix of all ages. It was a mix of races, just about every kind of mix you could get that went there because it was one of the few bars open. So it really was one of the few places you could go to. There was also, I think, Ties was open for a while, but it was closed because that's when they started talking about building City Center and all this stuff, so they bought them out and closed them. At the time, there was, the Grotto opened, well, right around that time, maybe the middle to late 70s, the Grotto opened on South High Street here, and they would have Sunday tea dances and things like that. And I can't think what else there was. Herby's opened his first bar on Rich Street, and there weren't a whole lot. And then the Twilight, then there was Summer Station for the girls, and that was pretty much it back then. There wasn't a lot of other bars to go to.
So when you said you saw the sign about the Gay Activist Alliance at OSU, and you went to a meeting, or they had an office?
They had an office on the third floor of the Ohio Union.
And you went there, got some information. Do you remember any of the people that were the early people involved with Gay Activist Alliance?
I couldn't tell you their names. I do know some of the people who, after I started going a little bit more and became a little bit more interested, and this was probably late 70s, Brian Nedler is the name that comes to mind. I met Craig Covey there. He and I actually became friends in the late 70s before we did anything about Stonewall and all that. I remember some faces, but not really a lot of names. But Brian Nedler, and that's where I met Craig, so of course his name sticks out.
How big of an organization was the Gay Activist Alliance?
It was basically, at that time, pretty much centered around Ohio State, but there were some people outside the community or outside Ohio State that would attend the meetings. It was open to people outside, but a lot of its activities revolved around Ohio State.
And when you went to meetings, what was the average number of people that might be there?
Maybe 15, 20 people at the most at any meeting that I ever went to.
And what kinds of activities did they do, or services did they
provide? They had
provide?
discussions. They sometimes, I know they had a couple of little rallies that they organized a couple times, but mainly it was like kind of open discussions. They would talk about different topics, that sort of thing. I think, the meetings that I attended, it was basically to try to discuss different topics. One topic that sticks out at the time, I remember, was a discussion on whether it's proper for gay people to discriminate against black people, which just really kind of floored me at the meeting, because I thought, well, of course it's not, but there was actually people arguing on both sides of it, which really got to me. It's just, I remember that meeting sticking out in my mind, because I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Why are we even talking about this? But that's one meeting I remember. It was like I said, just basically a small group of people, and I think a lot of their activity, particularly during the day and stuff, their office was open a lot for Ohio State students to attend.
You go to the Gay Activist Alliance, you get some information, you learn about the fact that there's a couple of bars downtown, you go check those out and meet some people that way. What happens next?
Basically, the bar scene became a big part of my life. And I ran into Keith once again at the Kismet, and it was just a night both of us were there, and we happened to run into each other, and we just really kind of picked up as friends at first, and then he was looking for a place to stay, and I had an apartment up on the north side of town, and he moved in with me, and we became sort of in a relationship for a while. It was pretty open, but it was a kind of a relationship. It was about as, we considered ourselves lovers, I guess, at the time, but it was also a pretty open relationship. So really, it had its limits on it too. But we were really close. We were together for probably 7 years, living together, and we started attending some gay alliance meetings, and then from that it led to when they had the rally about moral majority coming to town, and that's how the whole Stonewall thing came up. And then a lot of both of our lives revolved around the bar scene a lot too, because that was, at that time, that was the pretty much the biggest social place for gay people to gather at. So it was, that's where all the gatherings went. The Kismet every year had a big Kismet picnic in the summer out at a little ranch on the west side of town. That was a big, huge event every year. And there was other things that people got involved with in the bars that kind of kept it as a community. And then people would have private parties. I met a lot of friends and would go to private parties and things like that where you became, closer to people and all this.
Tell me about the Kismet picnics.
Oh.
What do you remember of those?
They were huge parties. They rented a beer truck. I forget what the name of the ranch was. Something R Ranch. It was out on right off of West Broad Street. They held it every year. It was probably in June, July, something like that. And it would draw probably 300-400 people. And you paid a cover charge to get into it. You were there all day long. There was sex in the fields. There was, heavy drinking. There was drag shows. There was a little tent set up for gambling. Just about, you name it, it went on, And there was food. People brought side dishes and things, and there was people that even drive campers out and park them on the lot or the farm, the ranch that was rented and stuff. And it was an all-day party, and it was a big event. So
was it pretty much a guy event?
Chiefly, although there was girls there. There was, because Doris, who owned the Kismet at the time, Doris Safewright, knew a lot of lesbians. So a lot of them would come out because they knew her. And so, it was more of a mix than the bars were. I would say maybe, 10-15% of the people there were women.
You also mentioned going to private parties. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little bit about what that was all about?
It would be like, there was different kinds of parties. One would be just like a potluck party or something that, people would go to. I remember a couple of friends, that would have like a party every 3-4 months and just invite, maybe 20-30 people to go over. And sometimes, in the upstairs, there'd be sex in some of the upstairs rooms. Some of them, no, there wouldn't be. It'd just be everybody sitting around talking. And there was one couple that I remember that had what was called a towel party every year. And you went and you checked your clothes at the door and you had a towel. It was kind of like going to the baths, but it was a private party. And there was plenty of sex at that one. It was a yearly event for them to have it. And it drew, there was probably 50, 60 people who would go to it. So, and we went every year. It was a good time. So, I was young and stupid, and this was the '70s, so you did a lot of partying back then. You hadn't even heard of AIDS yet. So,
you mentioned a while ago about having different jobs, like you've previously been employed in bars.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me about that, starting with where you were first and kind of?
The first bar I ever worked in was called Imaginations. It was back in '81 or '82 that it opened.
And who owned that?
His name was Sven Jorgensen, I think was his last name. I can't remember for sure, but I think Jorgensen was his last name. He's the one who opened it, and I worked there for probably 4 months, 5 months, and he was a pretty big con man. He knew how to get equipment and stuff without paying for it up front. And an interesting story is I worked as a happy hour bartender, and two performers at the time who were very popular in with the gay clientele were Ann and Steve, and they did a piano singing routine, and I worked in the piano bar. And there was one day when they were performing, and they're in the middle of their act, and the piano company comes in to repossess the piano. So I have to get on the phone and call Sven and say, the piano company's here to repossess the piano. And he said, well, stall him. And I said, well, how am I supposed to stall him? He said, well, tell him I'm on my way with a check. So I did. Well, they were patient. They stood around and waited for him to bring the check in. Well, it was about 3 weeks later, the piano company comes back in, the check had bounced. So it was in the middle of another Andy performance. So I call him again, and it's like, well, stall him again. And it's like, Sven, I can't stall them. They're not going to listen to me. They want cash on the barrelhead right now. So he said, well, take money out of the register and pay them. And they took like a down payment of, several $100s. And so it was after that I left then and I started working at Herby's, because I'd met, while I worked there happy hour, I met a lifetime friend of mine, Rick Herman, who was a part-time bartender at Herby's at the time, and Herby had an opening, and this was when he had moved to Marconi after Richwood, after the town had bought him out, or the city had bought him out, and he had enough money to open up the place on Marconi, and he had just opened it, and he was looking for a bartender, nighttime bartender then, and so I went and interviewed with Herby and started there, and I worked at Herby's from 1982 to 1986. And then in 1986 I opened my own bar called The Attic, and had, with a partner, had The Attic from 1986 to 1990. And then my partner died, and we had not really made the legal papers that we should have, and his family came in and wanted me to buy it out, and I really didn't have the money, so I ended up selling the bar, and then started working at the Tremont, and worked at the Tremont from 1990 to late 1994, and then at this time I was like 40, and I started thinking I need to get a job where I have some insurance and some security. I mean, bartending, I love bartending. It was a wonderful profession, and I have great memories of it. And it's, the a large part of my life was spent in the bars and, working in the bars and stuff, and that's where I met a vast majority of my friends. And, but I knew at the time I needed to get a job, like I said, that had some security. So Ameritech was hiring at the time. This is right after, they had been bought out. Ohio Bell had been bought out by Ameritech, and they were hiring new people. And so I went and interviewed with them and got a job with them, and then I was there until the year 2000, and I was in management there, and they did a retirement buyout, and then been working in the same company for 5 years since then, or 6 years since then. So
I actually went to Imagination shortly after they opened, and to me, it was a different kind of bar for Columbus. It kind of like was a step in the direction of more where bars are now. So describe to me what Imaginations was like.
Well, it was a very brightly lit bar, and a lot of the bars then were still not that brightly lit. It was one of the few to have a pretty much open patio. They had glass doors where most of the bars then, like Trade Winds and places like that, didn't have glass doors, and it was a very clean, upscale, huge disco. I mean, the dance area was like nothing Columbus had ever seen. It had a second level floor with 2 bars up there. I worked one of those bars too. It had like where you could actually stand in the second level balcony, look down on the dance floor, and it had DJs that performed there all the time. It was really, like you said, a big difference in the type of bar. And it was one of the first to have several different types of bar in one bar. It had the piano bar that was more relaxed and more, like it had the ANST performance or somebody just playing the piano at night or something like that. And then you'd step from there and you'd be into the throbbing dance floor bar on the main level. And then there was the upper level that had like some couches and stuff, and then the upstairs bars that you could still hear the music downstairs, but it was more of, I think, a cruisy area and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot bigger than any bar Columbus had seen yet. Yeah.
And who was this Sven person? Was he straight, gay?
He was gay. Some wild parties out at his house. He ended up skipping town. This was after I started at Herby's, and he ended up skipping town owing a huge amount of money on the bar. and nobody ever heard from him again. He was, at that time, probably, at the time I think I was either in my late 20s or very early 30s, late 20s, and he was in, I would say, maybe 41, 42. I don't know where he came from, but he seemed to have a lot of money when he first started opening the bar. I actually had met him through Bob Kashner, who owned the, at the time it was just called Trends, and Bob introduced him to Craig Covey and I one night, and that's when he was just talking about opening Imaginations, and just met him there. And then when they started talking about opening him, they had interviews for bartenders, and I went over and interviewed for a bartender job, and got the job. And but he, like I said, before meeting him through Bob Kashner, I'd never heard of him before. He just kind of happened on the scene. I'm not even sure where he came from or anything. So, and he kind of disappeared as quickly as he came on the scene too. So.
And did the bar continue without him?
Somebody bought it after that. I forget who bought it then. I think because that bar used to go from being, and I think it still did up until the early 90s, or I mean early 2000s, it would go for like gay bar, black bar, country bar, gay bar. I mean, it was several different kind of locations, but I don't remember if it turned into a straight bar for a while, but then after that somebody else bought it, and I think it was called Bananas, or it was named something else. Then it turned into another kind of straight bar, and then it became 1470 East, named after, because the guys who owned the 1470 West in Dayton bought it, and they had it for a while, and then it closed down, and then it became another kind of straight bar, and then it became another gay bar, and I forget what that one was called. So that location never really seems to have been lucky as far as a bar staying there.
When you went to work at Herby's, who was the owner there?
Herby Leach.
And that was when it was located where the hockey stadium is.
Exactly, yes, where the practice stadium is now, yeah.
All right. And then you said in 1986 you opened the Attic. Mm-hmm. And that was located
above the grotto on North High Street.
Right. And then you went to the Tremonts. Mm-hmm. And who was the owner of the Tremont at that time?
When I first started there, Doris Safeway was. She then sold it to Danny Smith, who now has it, and has had it pretty much solidly since, I think it was like 1991 or 2. I think he bought it in 1991, and he's had it since then.
You mentioned a little while ago that Doris also owned the Kismet at some point in time. Tell me about what was her connection to owning gay bars in Columbus?
She actually was partners with Eddie Santucci, who was the original owner of the Kismet. And then at one point bought him out because he was getting on in years, and I think he wanted to retire and kind of get out of the bar business. So she bought him out, and at that point, that's when the Kismet moved from High Street over to where it is, or where Eagles was, up until it closed a few months ago. And so, I mean, pretty much she knew a lot of the gay crowd. She was very good friends with Herby Leach. Herby used to work for her. She was good friends with a lot of the gay crowd. So she had an inroad, and it was kind of a natural progression for her to buy a gay bar. And she was, I mean, there were certain things that she did that people didn't like, and I understand that. And some people will tell you stories about her that are not good stories, you know, and granted, every bar owner has their quirks and does things that people aren't particularly wild about, but she had a good side too. If one of her gay clientele would get in trouble with the law, she'd be the first one to get out and bail them out and go to court for them, you know, so she was really good about that. And she, like I said, she threw the Kismet party picnic every year and stuff, and I mean, she was overall a good gay bar owner. You know, she wasn't just some straight person went in it just for the money. You know, she had a lot of good friends who were in it too. And a lot of people that I became good friends with over the years too. So.
Prior to owning the gay bars, had she operated other bars?
Yeah, and I can't remember the names. I think one of them was called Chet and Charlie's.
So she'd been in the bar business.
Yes. Yes.
And then, okay.
Mm-hmm. She'd been in the bar business for quite a while. Yeah. A lot of them just smaller, little dive type of bars. I think she owned a couple on Parsons, a couple on South High Street. So she'd been in the bar business for a while, and a lot of the gay clientele would come into her bars, and she'd welcome them in there, and that was just like a mix of, which is, I mean, you can still see that today on Parsons Avenue. You get a mix of gay and straight people, and nobody really cares one way or the other. They just go in and party, and that's about it. So.
Tell me about the Starlight. Did you ever go there?
Twilight?
Oh, the Twilight. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Twilight.
Yeah, that's the first real drag bar I was ever in. It was on North Cleveland Avenue, up a little bit north of Cleveland and 17th, not in a really good part of town. But they had pretty much, it was strictly pretty much a drag bar. And that's where I met people like Brandy Lamont, Stephanie Powers, Georgia Jackson, people like that I've known to this day that are icons in the female illusionist world and drag queen world. And those were the first shows I ever saw, and they were fun. It had a stage. It was a dark little bar. It was just like the other kind of bars back then, the other gay bars where there was no windows or anything like that. It was pretty much a dark bar. It had a stage in the back part of it, and then it had a bar up front. And like I said, it pretty much thrived on drag shows. So.
And who was the owner of that?
Two lesbians. For the life of me, I can't remember their names. And I knew them at the time because I'd met them through Brandy and Georgia. But I didn't really know them real well. But they owned the bar the entire time I went there. And their names may come to me later, but
all right.
Probably too late.
All right. Now, just you mentioned one other bar. I just wanted to ask for you to describe what it was like, where it was at, and that was Ties.
Ties was a big dance bar, and it was pretty cheaply that. And it was kind of I wouldn't say a barn of a bar, but it was pretty good size. But it was strictly pretty much dance, all 70s disco music, pretty much just a nighttime bar. A friend of mine, John Cheneman, who's nicknamed Weasel, worked there as at the door and stuff for a long time until they closed it down. It was a nice bar. It never really seemed to be super crowded because I think it was too big for Columbus at the time. But it was a nice little bar. Strictly, pretty much went there to dance, and I really don't even think I would describe it as a cruisy bar because I don't remember myself ever cruising anybody in there or ever trying to pick anybody up in there. It was just usually a group of us who would go there to dance and stuff. And
it was located where the city center's at now?
It was on Rich Street or a little bit south of Rich Street. There was a parking lot a little bit north of it, and then there was Ties, and it was torn down. It was actually torn down long before they ever did City Center. It was torn down when they first started putting up remember when they had the roller rink thing, and it was torn down then when they started putting that up, long before they built City Center. But they bought it out because there was, all the plans in the making at the time of building this big downtown center, and Ties was sitting on property that was going to be part of it. So was Herby's. So that's why they bought Herby's out too, because they wanted to.
And where was the Herby's located?
Herby's was right on Rich Street, and it was pretty much. I think it was close to 3rd. It was on a south side of Rich Street, and it was on the north side of Rich Street. Yeah, and Herby's was a real dive at that place. I mean, it was just pretty much a dive bar, and it was basically you went in there just to have a drink with friends and stuff. It was a real tiny little bar, probably would seat 40 people at the tops, and Herby just happened to get lucky because the city paid him top dollar for the business and everything, and so he was able to open up the Marconi bar, which is a much nicer place. But his bar on Rich Street was a dive, and he would have been the first to tell you that too.
All right, let's shift gears here. Let's talk about what led up to you being involved in the formation of Stonewall. How did you get to that point?
Well, like I said, Craig and I met at Gay Alliance, and he and this was right after the stupid Orange Juice Queen's name, Anita Bryant thing down in Miami-Dade County, where she got the referendum passed to overturn the protection law and all this stuff, and then there was the rumor that Falwell was going to bring more majority to town, and it was supposed to start up on this church on the east side of town, this big, huge church. And Craig and a couple other people that he knew were pretty instrumental in going around and getting people to get involved. He got a hold of me and Keith at the time, and there was like 2 or 3 other people that he got involved in, and pretty soon it grew, and there was probably 60, 70 of us that went out to protest around this church and stuff. And
when you say Craig, you mean?
Craig Covey.
Okay.
And because Craig was pretty political back then. So as a matter of fact, I think Craig might have been president of Gay Alliance for a while, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, so he got all this organized, and we went out, we marched, and we pretty much outnumbered anybody who was out there, and the number of people of us were more than the people who attended the church. So, considered it a big success. And then, so after that, we kind of went back to, was 2 people, Craig Huffman, who you met, and Danny Below, who he lived with at the time, had a celebration party back at their house, and there was like 8, 9 of us that got together back there, and we started talking about the need for an organization that would be more than just something for, like Gay Alliance was pretty much focused on campus, and we talked about the need for a community organization. And so we pretty much got the ball rolling then. And
was this 1981?
Yeah, 81, yeah, because it was the next year that we had the first parade, right. This was in the summer of 81, I think, when we first started doing it, because it was in the fall we started going around to the different bars to register people to vote. And this was before we had actually even incorporated or anything. And so we went to like the Garage, we went to Kismet, we went, I think the Grotto, a couple other places to register people to vote. And we also at the same time had people sign up for a mailing list, because we were going to start trying to send out some mailings on things that we were going to try to get started and everything. So that's when at the time we started meeting in Craig's apartment, and then there was like 7 of us that got together, and that's when we went and we did the papers of incorporation and all that. And
who were the 7 people?
The original 7 involved were Keith, Craig Covey, his lover at the time, Steve Wilson, Craig Huffman, Dennis Below, myself, and Keith McKnight. Oh, I already said Keith McKnight. There was one other person then. Cindy, I can't remember her last name now. But she was at like one of the original meetings too. So I don't think she signed the papers of incorporation. I think Craig and I and Keith and Craig Huffman did. It's, you'll have to jog my memory. And I think, did Steve Wilson sign them too? No? Okay. So, but we were the ones to sign that. So then we started holding meetings. So that's when we started planning on doing, trying to get together a march for the next year in June to coincide with what we'd picked. We'd picked June because of the fact that it was the anniversary of Stonewall in New York. And that's back when cable TV still had, they offered, and I think they still do today, a community access type of thing where you could, an organization could go in and to one of the cable studios and broadcast over community cable access. And we started the Stonewall Union show where we would broadcast, and we started talking about, we had our, I think it was called Stonewall Reports, was the name of the show, and we did news articles and we talked about the parade. We interviewed Doug Whaley at the time. We interviewed several other people. That's when we first broke the AIDS story. We didn't even know what it was called then. We just read a little article. It was in the San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was. Craig had picked it up about men in, I think it was in New York and San Francisco, gay men who were coming down with Kaposi sarcoma, which was at that time only known to be in elderly Jewish men. And there was, they thought they found a link to it, and there was no name for it at the time. And so that's when we first reported on that. And pretty much that snowballed at the time then, and you started hearing more stories about it. And
who was in charge of the cable access?
Craig and I were.
Did you have any problems getting permission to do the show?
No, they were very open. They let pretty much any organization do a show on it. And you filmed it basically at their studios. They would then broadcast it on community access. There was, a lot of different, there was like shows on it that were just goofy shows. They also had religious shows on it. They had shows like ourselves. There was other progressive shows would be on it. I think the Communist Party at the time had a show that they had on it, so they pretty much opened it up to anybody. So, and it was a good outlet to I mean, you didn't have a heavy amount of people watching it, but still it was a good outreach because a lot of people at the time were getting cable and had cable, so it was a good way to get out to people.
What kind of response did you get from the community at large to the program?
Oh, we got some, at our post office box, we'd get some kind of, a little bit of nasty letters, but not anything that, out of the ordinary. Most of it was positive stuff, just people writing in. A lot of it was people writing in because at the end of the show we would broadcast our post office box and how they could get a hold of us. We would put Craig's telephone number on it, which I got to give him credit for putting his personal telephone number on there, but put that on there and people would call sometimes for information. And, it was basically positive information that we would get. I don't remember a whole lot. I mean, there was some, it was still early 80s, so you're still going to get some cranks to call up and leave stupid notes or leave stupid messages or send you a hate letter or something like that. But for the most part, it was good positive letters.
After you guys started meeting, what other services or projects did you decide to undertake? You started doing the cable television show. What were the other activities?
For the first year, our biggest focus was, besides doing the TV show, signing people up to vote. And we did a little newsletter where we would keep people abreast of different issues that were going on, although we didn't have a PAC at the time or anything, so we didn't endorse anybody or anything like that. But our biggest issue the first year was working on the parade and getting people involved in that and trying to get bar sponsorship behind the parade and getting bar involvement in it. And
at that time, in other cities, were people having gay pride
parades?
Not in Ohio.
No, I don't remember. Maybe little small demonstrations or something, but I don't, at the time, no.
So where did the idea for the parade come from?
There had been an earlier kind of marches here in Columbus, really on a small scale, back in the late 70s. Maybe 150 people at the most attending them, and then like kind of the marches that we had. But we just all got the idea that it would be a great idea to have an all Ohio encompassing, because that's what our vision was, to bring in people from Cleveland, from Toledo, from Cincinnati, to come into Columbus and have an all Ohio parade, or march is actually what we called it at the time. And that's because that's at the first year. A lot of what Craig and I did too was because we would go around there were different gay organizations in different cities. There was like Cincinnati had a gay organization, Cleveland had a gay organization, Toledo did. They were small, but we would go and we would set up meetings with them to tell them about the parade and stuff, and to try to get their involvement and get their city involved and bring some people down to it. And so we were hopeful, that some of them would come down to it. And so we did. And we thought that it would be a great way to try to build a community within Ohio, and not just have it be Columbus and a small march. And so that's pretty much we envisioned having 300 or 400 people come down for the parade and everything. And so that's what we were basically working on, was to get people to do that.
Was there a committee that worked on the parade?
Yeah.
Who was on the committee besides you and Craig?
Cindy, Craig Huffman, Doug Whaley, because Doug became involved in Stonewall back in, he came up to our sign-up table back in September of '81, and when we were still just signing people up, started becoming really more involved in the group then. So he was on the committee. Keith was on it. And then we tried to get like some bar people to come over and just attend some of the meetings and stuff, so that they would be involved in it too. And we started getting a little bit, just a few people here and there that would attend some of the meetings. But basically the biggest share of the planning was Craig Covey, Craig Huffman, myself, Cindy, Keith did as much as he could, and Doug did a lot. So those were the basic people who were really involved in it.
Any problems or controversies in getting the first parade off the ground?
It was a little bit of a hassle to get the street permits and like that. It took a while to get them. You have to go through all the red tape of City Hall. They're basically, though, the police department was very cooperative. We had a good route mapped out, so that helped. Because if you went in, you had a positive route mapped out, and you knew exactly where you wanted to go, where you wanted to start from, and all this, and they were as helpful as they were going to be at the time.
What was the parade route?
It started in Goodale Park, and it went out to High Street, and then it went down to the state capitol, turned up on Broad Street, and then just ended up on the state capitol lawn. So it was strictly straight down High Street. Am I right? No, I'm not right on that. I take that back. It started at Goodale Park, came out to High Street, went down to Front, came up Front, went up Broad to the State House, and then stopped there. Because I remember, it was down Front Street, because we first wanted to go down High Street, but the city didn't want us to use High Street. They wanted us to use Front Street because they figured it would be less traffic, that we would not tie up traffic as much using Front Street. So we ended up using Front Street. We went down Front Street and then came up Broad Street to the State House.
So what was the response to the first parade?
Bigger than we ever thought it'd be. We hoped for 300-400 people. And I was, and Ed Phillips, who was also, that's another person who was involved heavily in the parade committee. I forgot about him. At the time, he was actually the chairman of getting the parade organized at Goodale Park. And he and I were both at Goodale Park getting, everything set up. And so we were looking that morning for maybe, like I said, 300, 400 people. Well, all of a sudden, huge amounts of people start showing up in Goodale Park. We had built a float that I was actually riding on. It's actually a van with a stepladder on top with Ohio Gay Pride Parade on both sides of it. Boy, when I think about that, I was like, stupid for riding on that. But we had built that, and so that was, we figured that was probably going to be the only float thing that was going to be in it. But then MCC had a little one. Toledo had brought down something, and then all of a sudden these people, and there was, the news at the time said that they thought that there was 800-900 people. We thought we got a fairly good, accurate count that there was like maybe 1,200 people, and there was more down at the State House. So it was between 1,000 and 1,200 people that were in the parade, and it was a big parade. I mean, for the time, it was amazing. Our mouths dropped. It was more than we ever expected. So it was a very moving experience to go through, particularly since it's the first one.
Were there people along the route watching the parade as well?
There was no. There was some protesters along the route. There was maybe a pocket of people here or there, not anything like it is today. There was a few maybe people that would be along the route, but no, nothing like it was today. There was just there was protesters leaving the park, and there was protesters when we got to the State House lawn. And when we got to the State House, there was more people, more gay people there watching the parade. But there's also protesters there too. So.
And who were these protesters?
Not really, just people at the time. The really right wing. Some of the same ones that stand out there today. And if you have I gave Stonewall a tape one time with some of the original newscasts. I don't know if the office still has it or not, but they actually interview some of the preachers and stuff who were out there protesting it, and as well as a lot of the people who were in the parade. And if you see them out there, it's some of the familiar faces you see today that still go out there and do it. So, but most of them were the right-wing churches, and then there was just people who were, people just wanted to see what was going on too. There weren't a lot of people at all along, like I said, that you would see, like you see today. It was basically, most of the people were either at the beginning of the parade or at the end of it.
What was the rally made up of?
We had, first one, we had it was called the Columbus Men's Chorus at the time. That just started up. They sang in it. We had Senator Mike Swartzwelder, who was a state senator at the time, and he spoke.
How was it that he showed up at the first gay rally?
He knew Craig through organizations. He actually appeared on one of our Stonewall reports and shows. He was very pro-gay, as pro-gay as you could be at the time, and he was very pro-gay. He actually spoke of, at the time we were looking for equal employment, or protection in employment. He spoke of doing that. He thought that should be a statewide thing, and spoke of working for that. So we asked him to be there. The head of the national head of the MCC, I do not remember his name. He spoke a little bit, and he gave a closing prayer. We had a lesbian performer at the time, and I cannot remember her name, and she sang, and we had Doug Whaley spoke and did his really good speech about every time I say the word bigot, I want you to, or queer or dyke or whatever, or no, every time I say the word queer or dyke or fag, I want you to yell back bigot, and he got the crowd going really well on that, and Doug's really good at that. He spoke, and then, like I said, we had the chorus sing, and Craig Covey spoke, I spoke a little bit, and that's pretty much the rally that time. It was not a long rally, but it was a fun rally. And then we closed it off by, we passed out helium balloons at the end of it, and Craig gave closing remarks, and everybody chanted "Gay Pride now," "Gay rights now," "Gay rights now," and everybody let go of their helium balloons at the same time, and it was kind of neat. All the balloons were floating off in the sky at the same time. So.
Any problems with getting permission to use the State House lawn?
No, it was pretty much just, you had to get permits, and they pretty much would allow anybody to. I mean, at the time, you could also at any given afternoon you could see the KKK down there too, or something. So they pretty much, as long as you got the permit and paid any fees that there were, then you were allowed to use it.
Tell me about the newsletter. You said there was some sort of a newsletter.
Well, it really wasn't a newsletter. We just would, to the people who signed up, it was kind of a newsletter. Yeah, we would keep people informed of what's going on with the parade plans, and maybe talk about some other issues in the community. It was just we basically ran it off in Craig's apartment, and we'd type it up on Craig's typewriter on 11 by 14 inch paper. 8.5 by 14 in legal paper, and would take it then down to Monk's Copy downtown and copy it off and send it out to people. So
how many of these would get mailed out?
200 to 300 at the beginning. Yeah, probably 200 to 300.
What other activities or services did Stonewall get involved in that first year or two?
Well, we actually set out to try to get Stonewall branches started in other cities, and we did get one started in Cincinnati, and we got one started in Cleveland. And then after the parade, then more people like Rhonda Rivera became involved in it, and then they started doing more along the political end of it, and I really didn't get a big deal involved, a lot involved in that. That was basically Craig's ball game at the time, and Rhonda's, and I think Doug worked kind of closely on that, but got more involved in setting up forums to try to get the candidates who are running for office to come and speak at and things like that, and they became active in that, and we'd try to open it up for the public to come to it, and got heavily involved in that, and then got involved with trying to get the health. We would go to different places and set up things for the health department to be there to test people for venereal disease and HIV. Well, they really didn't do a whole lot of testing for HIV at the time, but got them to do tests for venereal disease and things like that. We kind of worked with the Columbus Health Department closely to get people to go there and get checked out and things. Would set up, again, we still went around to different bars and stuff to register people to vote. We were heavily into registering people to vote, that sort of thing. So,
where did the money come for all these activities?
We would hold fundraisers in bars, and just basically donations from people. Some of the bars, like Bob Kashner, gave us some donations. The Kismet gave us some donations. People like that would hold fundraisers for us, and we had a party at. I lived at an apartment on North 4th Street, and we had an after-hours party one night at the apartment I had. It was a big, huge apartment, and we held an after-hours party there, and just charged a slight, admission for people to get in, and we had a big turnout for that. It raised probably, $300-400, and we would get a couple $100 here and there, just to. Pretty much we were a fly-by-night organization. I mean, it was just a shirt tails or coat tails, operation where you had as much money to get you by this week as you possibly could have, and then you worked for the money for the next week. There wasn't a big budget at the time at all. So. Well,
if you had to estimate what the annual budget would have been in those first early years.
The first year, maybe $1,000. Not much. A lot of what we did was total volunteer work. I mean, most of what the involvement we would get would be people totally volunteering their time and their efforts. And somebody like Cindy would talk to people that she would know who would volunteer materials to make badges and volunteer paper to help with the newsletter, and would volunteer for. We got actually after we started going to Monk Coffee Shop for a long time, got them to donate, give us money off on copies that we'd make there. A lot of it was just twisting people's arms to get them to give us something free, because basically that's how we had to operate it. As far as cash goes, we were operating out of Craig's apartment, and
where was that located?
It was on 8th Avenue, right just west of 4th Street, in a little brick apartment, a little one-bedroom apartment that he and Steve Wilson had, and our meetings were there, and that's where our club was. And Craig and I, at the time, we were fortunate because we both had some money that we could work off of, and so we were able to work in the daytime and get things done. So that's how we were able to go to different cities and like this. And I was on unemployment at the time because I gotten laid off from a job I had. So that was the income that I had. So I was able to donate my time. And Craig was on unemployment too because he'd gotten laid off from where he worked. So we kind of took advantage of the time, and we were able to use this to put out the newsletter, and we would just have little parties where we would get people together and get volunteers to come up, and we had this little button making kit. And so we would have like a group of 8 or 9 people sitting around making, 300 or 400 buttons at a time. And like I said, people would donate the material for it, donate the paper, and the help us buy the buttons, and then we just stamp the buttons out and pass them out and things. And
the buttons would say
Stonewall Union, Ohio Gay Pride Parade, 1982 Ohio Gay Pride Parade. Most of them said Stonewall Union because that's what we were called at first. And we just put out a lot of buttons like that. As it went on, then we would put out buttons for maybe like when Mike Schwartzwalder was running, we put out a few buttons for him or something like that, to pass out in our community. And then we would get a little bit creative too and put out pink triangle buttons and things like that too. So, but most of them said Stonewall Union like that. And that was basically just putting, I forget where we got the font for it, but we were able to, put it on white 8.5 by 11-inch paper, cut out the things in the shapes of little buttons, and then you put a piece of plastic over it, and then you stamp the buttons together like that. And that's how we made our buttons.
After Stonewall was first formed, was there immediately a board of trustees, or was it basically you guys running the operation?
We kind of formed the board. Craig was the executive director. I was the associate director. Keith was the treasurer, or no, he was the secretary. Craig Hupman was the treasurer. Then we had some just general people on the board. And Steve Wilson was on the board, Denny Below was on the board. Then after Doug joined, he was on the board. Cindy was on the board. And that was pretty much it. That was pretty much what made up the board. So that was basically the first year we were together until after the parade and that fall. And then we started getting some more people in that fall, and then we started having elections and starting setting up. When Rhonda joined, because Rhonda had a really brilliant mind of setting up, getting things in detail, and she saw the need for actually getting the organization, focused on we should have this kind of a committee and this sort of thing, and she was very good at that. And so she started setting up things like that, and that's where then it really became, having committees and doing things like that. And that's kind of when I lost touch to, and it wasn't because I was pissed off or anything. I just lost touch because I was starting to become more involved in, that's when I started working at Herby's, and then I was becoming more involved in that aspect of life and was getting less involved in, and had really less time for Stonewall. So I was doing a lot more work with them. Still worked like to get Stonewall to come in and do different parties and stuff like that at Herby's, but I kind of started dropping out and just did like, I left the board and just became a general member at the time then. So I kind of lost touches to the inside workings of everything after, it was about a year and a half or so after I really became involved in Herby's.
Did when Stonewall was first formed, did you sell memberships? Was there like?
No, it was free.
Okay.
After a year, I think we started then charging a nominal fee for people to become members, and it was called a donation. We didn't really, we wouldn't drop anybody off the mailing list for not donating to it, but if you donated, you got your name on, you know, a list of people who were, and we had like started having different levels of donations and stuff too. So
after the organization was first formed, did you have any meetings with any politicians to talk about goals or expectations?
Not when it was first formed. After about a year, we started trying to do that. In a sense, we had a casual meeting with like Michael Schwartzwalder, but not with any like bigger politicians or anything. Really didn't start seeing that until, you know, it had been after the parade, the first parade, and things started kind of building momentum. Excuse me, and then we started having, I think politicians became more interested in what we had to say and what our interest was with them, and they started listening to us more. When we first started, I don't think that they paid that much attention to us, just looked at us as another organization that started, you know, because we really hadn't made a big name until after the parade, you know, and then when it made all the TV channels and everything and the newspaper, so then I think politicians and people in general started noticing us more. So,
besides that first protest at the church that kind of led to the formation of Stonewall and the annual parades, were there any other rallies or protests or things that you remember taking place?
Well, even before that first protest at the church, we went, it was a march, and it was a protest, I think it had to do with the Anita Bryant thing. It was before, yeah, because before the moral majority thing even started coming to town, it had more to do with the Anita Bryant initiative, and that was just basically a protest march, and it was around another church that was affiliated with her or something, or her it was a Baptist church or something like that, and that was a group of maybe 25, 30 people that was protesting that. There was also a protest. There was a bar out on the East Main Street that was called the Silent Woman, and it had a sign on the outside of it with a headless woman. And so we got together, a group of people, a lot of them lesbians, and then like people like Cindy and people like that got people together, and we went out and protested back and forth in front of that bar for, you know, because it was derogatory to women and everything. So, and that was probably 30 or 40 people. There were small marches here and there, small, you know, protest rallies and things like that here and there. Started to see a lot more of that as AIDS became a bigger issue, and started to see a lot more organizations spring up and then holding rallies to inform people about AIDS, and when it wasn't even called AIDS, and rallies to inform people, you know, of what was going on, rallies to try to raise money for research and like that. So I think you started seeing a lot more of that as it became a bigger issue. And I started getting more involved in that end of it too. So,
what was your involvement in?
I've worked with, it first was called the William F. Anderson Foundation, which is, it's now the Columbus AIDS Task Force. It was first called the William F. Anderson Foundation because William Anderson was the first gay male to die of the disease not known as AIDS back then. I forget what it was even called back then. But he was the first man to die of it here in Columbus, so that started, and I went around and like did help them in fundraisers and got people, just I kind of worked in the background with them and would go around to bars and pass out condoms and things like that, and then after it was the William F. Anderson Foundation, then it wasn't the Columbus AIDS Task Force, but it was AIDS. It was an AIDS Task Force, but I forget what it wasn't called the Columbus AIDS Task Force until the next step. And I was kind of working with them, got them to come into Herby's, when I worked there, and they would come in and do like little fundraisers and stuff like that. And it was back when it was pretty, ground level. I mean, they hadn't really gotten a big start or anything yet, but they're trying to do a lot of awareness at the time and because this was back like 84, 85, 83, 84, 85, along in there when Reagan still hadn't talked about it, and it was still just trying to get people aware that it was a dangerous thing and we had to watch out for it and like that. So,
do you recall any, other than what we've talked about, when you look back on your time in Columbus, do you recall any gay-related scandals or problems or controversies, issues?
Scandals?
Police raid?
Oh, I remember when the Dispatch published the names of a number of people who were busted at a roadside rest, I think out on 33, the names and occupations. And there was teachers, there were prominent business people, and the Dispatch put their names out on, in one of their sections. And that caused a real big stink then because, you just didn't think of doing that, but they just published everybody's name who had been busted there. And it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people. And several people that I knew who came in to like Herby's and places like that I worked, it hurt their professions and like that, and because they had been entrapped out there. So that was one of them.
Was the Dispatch friendly to the gay community?
No, not at first, no. It was awful. The only kind of article they would print would be a derogatory article. It was one of the most conservative papers. I was surprised that they even put anything about the first parade in there. But it was such a big, overwhelming event, like nothing Columbus had seen, that they were forced to print something in there. It wasn't very positive, but they talked about it being a ragtag, this sort of thing and all that. But no, they were about as conservative as you could get. There probably weren't a lot of really pro-gay, other than, the smaller, I suppose, Columbus Alive or other paper at the time, although they were really small, were about as progressive as you could get. The CJ, which was still around then, really wasn't overly pro-gay either. And to be honest, the TV stations weren't. They reported on the parade and they didn't do it in a derogatory manner. I thought, because they did equal time. They interviewed me, all three of them, and they also interviewed the protesters, but they didn't go out of their way to be pro-gay or anything. They didn't put positive light stories in there. They just kind of reported the story, and that was it.
Starting at the time that you came to Ohio State, were there local gay publications?
There was a little tiny paper run by a person named Harold Herman. It was as big as the Outlines magazine is. It was about that size, as far as the size of the actual booklet. It was purely local. He did it out of his house. I don't even know how he got his circulation. Mostly you would see it in the gay bars, and you would see it at the Gay Alliance office. And I think he did that once a month, and he would actually do a lot of where he would pick up from other larger gay newspapers like The Advocate, because The Advocate was around then. There was a Midwestern gay newspaper that came out of Chicago, or gay magazine out of Chicago, I think at the time. I think there was one out of Detroit. As far as locally, I think that was the only one I can remember for a while. Then there was another one that started up that I don't remember the name of that either, but it didn't last very long. But there wasn't a whole lot, no. Just little tiny things around Columbus. I think the biggest things I would say at the time were the ones that came out of, particularly like when you go into the bars, because some of the bars would have the issues of like the one out of Chicago and the one out of Detroit in there, and you'd go in and like pick one of those up, and basically those are the ones that would cover our area at the time. So, and they would do like a little bit of local Columbus news, but a lot of theirs was Chicago news or Detroit news or things like that.
What motivated you to get involved with the start of Stonewall?
Just my involvement with Craig and with the original march, and the fact that I really saw that we had a need for that kind of organization in the city.
Prior to that, had you been involved in other sort of community service kinds of activities?
I've been involved, somewhat with Gay Alliance, just going to their meetings and things. No, not a whole lot. I can't really think of any that stand out now.
Were there any restaurants that were known as gay restaurants?
Not really known as gay restaurants. After the bars would close, I remember like people would go to the Village Junction. There was...
That's the restaurant that was on South High there in Jersey.
Right, it's where Blockbuster is now. They would, for a while, people went to, there was a restaurant on Olentangy people would go to sometimes, but there wasn't really a per se gay restaurant.
Besides the Gay Activist Alliance and then later Stonewall, during those early days, were there other gay or lesbian organizations or groups that you were aware of?
I know that there were some lesbian organizations that I really wasn't knowledgeable about, but I just heard that they were there. The only other organized thing that I knew about was Berwick each year, which had been going on for quite a while, and but that was basically just a big ball each year. No other real political or outreach organizations that I knew of at the time.
Are you aware of anything prior to the Gay Activist Alliance, just from hearing about from other people?
No, not here, no. I mean, I've read about the Madison Society and things like that, but I was never aware of any of that, no.
As far as your involvement goes in the Columbus community, is there something that you would say, or a couple of things maybe, if not just one, that you're most proud of?
Well, the organization that I belong to now, it's called Old Timers Club Central Ohio, OCCO for short, and we basically started up as a organization that it's revolved around keeping, it has people anywhere from in their 60s and 70s down to in their late or in their 20s and stuff, but it's just keeping the memory alive of community and what's going on. We started out as a group to hold parties in different bars and in people's houses and like that. And then in the last 10 years, we've become more also associated with raising money for charities. And I think one of the proudest things that we started, that we just started last year, the group, I'm president of the board, and we started our calendar project. And it was started to raise money for Paternoster House. And I don't know if you know much about them, but Father Phil runs that, and we started that out. We thought we'd raise, several $100s for him, and so we made a calendar of different gay bartenders in different gay bars around town. Each one for each month of the year, and so then we started selling it in the bars and stuff, and we ended up raising $2,500 strictly for Paternoster House, which was something that we're very proud of. We are now into our second year of it, and it's even going to be on a larger scale this year. We've gotten more people involved, and we are actually looking to also help add another organization. We we're looking at trying to help out an organization like Kaleidoscope with gay youth that are just coming out and need a place to go to, and be able to give them some money and like that. So I think it's a really good feeling, because we are a totally volunteer organization. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting here in a little while, and we get together on our own time, and it's like having a second full-time job sometimes. And these people that are on the board that are tirelessly putting their efforts forth to make sure that we produce a really good product and a nice calendar. And we produced a nice one last year. We're shooting to even have a better one this year. And like I said, we've gotten more people involved. We've gotten Stompers is going to be involved in doing we have a fundraiser coming up this coming Friday night at Q Bar. And Stompers is going to do a number for us, and we've got several of the well-known drag queens are coming out and doing numbers for us, and it helps raise money for printer costs and things like that. And so, you know, and then we've got other bars that have held fundraisers for us, and then the general overall where we make our biggest money for Paternoster House is since selling the calendars, and it's a fun experience and a very rewarding experience to be able to raise it and give the money to them who desperately need the money, because, you know, they have, other than the good graces of people contributing to them, they don't get a whole lot of funding, you know, so it helped them out a lot to be able to do projects that they couldn't do before. So that's a really good feeling, you know, that's something I'm very proud of, yeah.
Sure. We've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about, or something else that you wanted to mention that we haven't talked about?
Just our, as far as private life goes, Bill and I have been together for 16 years. It was 16 years this July. We are actually legally married in Ontario, and like the Netherlands and, you know, Belgium and Massachusetts. And over here is our, excuse me, that's our Canadian marriage license. We got that done 2 years ago. We went up to Niagara Falls and stayed at a gay bed and breakfast called the Oasis in Niagara, which is a really neat place. If you're ever in Niagara overnight, I recommend you get online and look up Oasis, because they are two wonderful people who have this place. And we spent a week there, and we got married in their courtyard, and it was a very nice experience. Something we're very proud of. Just to, you know, the fact that we celebrated at the time it was our 14th anniversary we celebrated by doing this. And we're both proud to have a union that has lasted for 16 years. Because, you know, a lot of people today, their relationships don't last a whole long time. So other than that, just that I've had a wonderful time in all the relationships I've had in the Columbus community. I'm very proud to say I'm from here, and it's a very rewarding experience to have gone from when I first came out to how close-knit it was and how few places there were for gay people to go, to see how now it's grown into one of the most accepting and one of the most written about gay-friendly cities in the entire United States. You know, it's really a neat thing to see. You know, that how much we have grown and how powerful of a place that and how great of a community we do have here. So.